Hello, I'm Amari Jones, and welcome to Caffeine TV. But today we're going to depart from our normal format of going through 3 headline numbers in just 3 minutes. Today we are sitting down for a long-form interview and talk about feminism with Syreeta McFadden. And Syreeta is a contributor at The Guardian. She's also the managing editor of Union Station, a literary magazine, and also is a contributor at Feministing, the feminist website, which is one of the ways she got talking to us today, and is also an adjunct professor at BMCC here in New York, and her writing has appeared in the New York Times and the Huffington Post, and so we're thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start out with the conversation that's really important on the front end, which is what is feminism, and what is feminism to you? The last time we spoke to Miriam Tickton, who is the head of, or was the head of gender studies at the New School, who gave us sort of a very academic and important orientation, but now we're kind of moving through, and so I want to hear from you as a person who is lay in that area, but who is also heavily engaged and writing about it constantly, is what's feminism to you?
Feminism to me is such an enormous question to even unpack and answer, which is not necessarily a pushback, but feminism is about full equality between genders, and personally, my favorite definition of what feminism is to me is I have to borrow from Roxane Gay: don't treat women like shit. Oh my God, bitch, that curse. But anyway, honestly, just don't be crappy to women.
What's that the bumper sticker saying, right? Which is feminism is the radical notion that all women are people.
Yeah. Feminism is the notion, the ideology that women are human beings.
Right.
Yeah. And human beings that are worthy of equitable treatment in all aspects of our society.
But some people may be like, well, of course they're human beings, and why do we have to have a conversation about the fact that women are human beings? I'm sure there are men and women out there who are like, of course women are human beings, and so why are you sitting here talking about the fact that I'm a human being? Of course I know I'm a human being. Right.
However, our social, certain behaviors that become normative in our society, socially how we are treated. We're still arguing whether or not women deserve fair and equal pay.
Right.
In 2015. We're still arguing whether or not a woman has dominion over her own body.
That's right.
And her own medical choices.
That's right.
In 2015.
One thing that I read the other day, I think one of the things that I read the other day that really surprised me is the fact that in the last 4 years alone, there have been 230 laws passed across the country which restrict a woman's access to abortion and to sexual health.
Right. Just the layers and stacks of legislation and paper, just all in terms of how to trap women into making choices that basically harm their ability to pursue happiness, that they actually violates their personhood. So we're of course I'm going to argue that women are human beings and should be treated as equal, when I have a whole host of societal policies and attempts to try and undermine that identity and that personhood. So yeah, I'm going to talk about it in 2015.
Right.
If just Texas alone, I think I want to say it was almost 2 years ago when I participated in a telethon to try and help, raise money for low-income women in Texas to be able to afford abortions.
Wow.
To secure safe and legal abortions, after Texas had already created a whole host of new laws to try and prohibit, basically shut down. God, I'm blanking on how many abortion clinics that within a reasonable distance between Houston and Austin, just the major cities, and what women now have to do in order to secure a safe and legal abortion, which is their constitutional right.
But for you, as you pointed out, right, it's not only about abortion, it's about equal pay, it's about control over one's body. That there are all of these structural issues which remain that prevent women from exercising their full humanity, which is one of the reasons why President Obama devoted a big part of his State of the Union address last month to that, right? Because the fact is that women aren't equal in a lot of ways, and so we have to create policies to help that happen.
Yeah, I mean, it was a as a State of the Union speech, it was pretty glorious.
Right.
In the sense of
on women's issues.
On women's issues.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you know, particularly in acknowledging the economic determinism for women and like making that case. It's more than just
right.
You know, it's more than just like whether or not women have control over their sex, like, you know, their
right.
bodies and their sexual selves and their,
right.
like that in and of itself.
Right.
But to also acknowledge that with talking about family leave and childcare, if we're talking about just a woman's ability to be able to exist in this society and be able to economically compete, like what makes sense, if what makes sense for us as a civil society.
Right.
It was that was impressive.
So, and you would define yourself as a feminist?
I would, and it took me a beat to
right.
get there.
Because a part of the conversation in feminism has been about the role of Black women in feminism.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, it has.
Can you talk about, was that part of your own tension?
That is part of my own tension. It always had been. I didn't come to feminism as a ideology or praxis
mm-hmm.
like through the lens of like...
It wasn't a political ideology that
it wasn't a political ideology I was drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't like, you know, freshman year of college, I wasn't introduced to like gender studies and was like, oh my God, feminism.
Right, this is the missing link in my life.
Right, this is the missing link in my life. And
yeah.
like, and how I understood, and once I came to understand what it is,
mm-hmm.
Like, you know, and I was like, oh, well, apparently I've always been raised as such
mm-hmm.
because of the women... the women in my family, my aunts, my grandmother, so like in particular, like just in terms of how they lived their life and how they engaged their life.
Yeah.
So knowing like, so I was like, all right, when I like understood that difference, I'm
yeah.
like, oh wow, that's what, like, you know, I'm like, all right, I can get with that. But I think what made me push back against it and more or less embraced a womanist ideology for a period of time was where African American women felt occluded from the feminist, like, you know,
kept out.
Yeah, just felt kept out. From like, we felt like it seemed that when I would talk with white women about gender identity and like how like in the fluidity of moving around like with our, you know, in civil society, I think what ended up happening for me, I was like, I'm not sure if we're talking, like, your issues aren't the same as my issues, and somehow you're explaining to me what my issues should be, and you're not even seeing the layers of complexity of my own identity. You're not seeing a Black woman.
Okay,
you're not seeing a Black woman in America. And these things are intertwined.
So let's unpack two things that you said.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that for a while you embraced a womanist idea rather than a feminist idea. So can you explain the distinction? What's a womanist versus a feminist?
Well, we go back to Alice Walker saying shades of purple in terms of feminists. Like, I can understand my agency as a woman, like a Black woman in order to, you know, pursue, like, you know, my quality of life, my equality. But it acknowledges my legacy, my history, my narrative as a Black person in the United States.
Right.
And that was far more appealing to me.
Okay.
Because I was like, all right, I can be around, or I can talk and engage and deal with the tenets of feminism, but I'm also speaking to people who speak the same language as me.
Okay.
And I feel like I can feel like that struggle of, you know, there's... It's always been such, like, I don't necessarily mean to sigh and make it more complicated an answer, but, you know, it's still like, you know, a thing that I think through and push back on. Is womanism
an area where more women of color look to express their fight for gender equality than white women? That is to say, does the complexion of womanism look different in terms of who defines themselves as womanist?
Yes,
versus
absolutely.
It does do.
It does. It does. It does. Yeah. And I think, and it really, that like, there was a silencing within you know, second wave feminism.
Which we talked about last time, the different waves of feminism. And the second wave feminism is the Betty Friedan feminism of the 1950s and 60s. The first wave was about the right to vote.
The first wave was the right to vote, and the first wave could give 0 F's about women of color. And
even though it flowed directly out of the abolitionist movement.
Of course, yeah.
Right? It was the same people.
Same people. Yeah. But like, you know, like I think there's like a post or the owl. I think it's either the owl or the toast that has a listing of like like feminists who sucked.
Right.
And these suffragists were part of the feminists who suck in terms of like their views about race,
yeah,
and about Black people. And I'm like, you know, and I remember knowing that and studying that, and I'm like, yay, you guys for getting the right to vote, but you don't see me in that in as part of that narrative.
So within that, how did you then come to define yourself as a feminist eventually, rather than a womanist? So you moved from womanism to feminism.
How I came back,
or how you got there, because you didn't start out as a feminist.
Yeah, how I got there.
Yeah,
I realized, like, because the culture has been so terrified of the F word, the feminism with a capital F.
Right.
And I mean, like, if I believe in, say, and do all these things in terms of like trying to build, you know, like to fight, champion, represent gender equality.
Which womanism does too.
Which womanism does too. And, you know, we've already, like, you know, I guess some people want to still qualify this as the third wave. I don't know. I feel like this is...
I think it's the fourth wave.
I want to say this is something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I don't even really know when the third wave ended. But I feel like what eventually made me embrace the word was that, you know, I also recognize there's something, you know, I still hold womanist ideals, but I still also hold feminist ideals. I don't need to necessarily exclude myself from the movement at this point in the 21st century.
But how do you define? So do you find yourself as both a womanist and a feminist? Or do you now define yourself as a feminist?
Why can't I have both?
Well, I'm asking how you define yourself. It's not a challenge.
No, I mean, I define myself as a feminist, but like I still like, you know, like, but I still like have like, you know, like the womanist parts are under, like, you know, are my foundation.
Right.
Yeah. So like I just
I got it.
I still feel like they're integrated.
Right.
But in terms of like representation and being part of like a larger movement and a larger narrative and a larger community of folks who are about gender parity, I feel that at this point it's a reclamation. Like I'm reclaiming feminist rather than feeling like I'm not necessarily part of that story.
I understand, right? So actually the journey for you from womanism to feminism is actually about bending the curve on feminism. It's about changing it to be something that functions for you, because it's also the case, right, that there are institutional pillars of the feminist movement that are about money and resources. And so the idea is not necessarily to ignore those things, but to turn them more towards the things that you care about.
Right. Yeah. I would agree with that. That's very well put.
Thank you. You know, from time to time, it comes and goes. Yeah. So okay, I understand that because you realize that there was a movement of women that were engaged, and there was some overlap. So the second thing that I wanted to unpack with you that I just was really riveted by was when you were saying that white feminists early on, one of the things that turned you off is like, those are not my issues, and those aren't the things that relate to or bear on my life. So what were those things? What were those things that they weren't recognizing?
I think they weren't necessarily recognized. It's one of those things where we try to do a hierarchy of struggles.
Define that.
All right. So a hierarchy of struggles where we start to, like, you know, rather than, there's something about the American idea, like the American identities, that don't necessarily do well to hold paradoxes, like, you know, hold
contradictory ideas.
Yeah, hold contradictory ideas in the same body.
But like, I can be a woman and a firefighter and a mother.
Right.
And I can do all those things at the same time.
Right. And I think with with second and like, and I think what third wave started to push back on, but with second wave feminists, it's like, you know, we're all sisters here. So your issues about class and like race are secondary to all of our, to the struggle of the sisterhood. And you're like,
so let me just define this for other people who are watching. So, I mean, who are watching.
Yeah.
to define this, which is that they were saying early on, like in the 60s, that the struggle for race and other issues that impact on other non-white middle-class women's lives were subordinate, were secondary to the overall fight for the things that they defined would make women equal.
Exactly, and you know, a lot of people have said this over the years, and a lot of people have written about this over the years, but there is something very patriarchal that kind of like happened in terms of like trying to set a hierarchy.
And patriarchal is how men run things.
How men run things.
It looks like the way that men run things.
Right. They'd like, you know, they're like, and it kind of ran the way how men would run things. Like somehow or because we were so young, I mean, like, you know, and I mean this in a royal way, that we were so young as a nation in terms of like trying to like deal with our, like, you know, our struggles and everything. There's a naivete of trying to like just bifurcate certain things. Like, let me put this in a box, let me put this in this box, and let me not necessarily look at, you know, or not recognize that in order for me to be treated like, you know, treated fairly and equal by men, I'm going to perform a kind of cis white male masculinity in how I approach the leadership and discourse.
Right, basically behave like white men.
Right.
In order to be a leader as a woman, I have to take on some of the characteristics of a man.
Right, and like, rather than like, you know, so like there is something strange to me that always struck me as strange about how the conversation and of like, you know, just around identities, they were like, you know, well, like, which led to that subordination of like struggle. So I'm like, do you not understand that like as a black woman or like I'm a black mother, so like, you know, I know you going into the workplace and like having like childcare and like being treated as an intelligent, sentient being is really important to you, but I have all of the, like, you know, but for me it's a flip mirror. So I'm like, the fact that I can be like, you know, I have to take care of my child. Like I'm already in the workforce by necessity anyway. Somehow you're like, you middle class, affluent white woman haven't necessarily, like, you're misaligning your struggle with mine. Right. And somehow, and because of your privilege, you can't even acknowledge that.
Right. And because for black women, right, the one of the things, I mean, women in my family used to say this, is that one of the things that turned them off about feminism was the fight for women to be able to work in the workplace, but for black women, there's never been a time when black women didn't have to participate in the overall broader economy, either through forced labor or through a matter of necessity, either as domestics or a whole host of things. So there's never not a time when black women weren't balancing their need to meet these external demands with the need to balance the household. That wasn't a privilege that black women had. And
you can hear, like, you know, the striations and like generationally with that kind of conflict still kind of like clashing in places when folks are like still like somewhat, you know, where one struggle is like to talk about, like, you know, like, I want to be able to work from home and do like childcare, and then you know, and I'm like, that's interesting that you think that have you missed all of the other brown and black women who have who would love to have that. I'm not saying it's quite as precisely as I want, but the image that comes to mind is the choice that brown and black women make to be stay-at-home mothers, and somehow there's a generation of the non-white women from, I guess, second wave feminism who don't necessarily perceive that, like, feel that that's undermining what the struggle was, and I'm like, you guys.
Okay, so
I don't know if brown women ever had for brown women to like exercise and advocate that choice, and you feel that that's a setback in feminism, means that you've also completely misaligned and misunderstood just like, you know, places in this struggle.
Right. So what are the places, what are the areas where black women and white women you think then have overlap? If there's this separation or this misunderstanding or this historical misunderstanding around economics, and that's what are the areas where there is an overlap between black women and white women's interest in, and what do you think, what's that?
2 places. It's equal pay and reproductive health.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it affects every single woman. That's the core struggle.
Right, and also violence.
Yeah, violence. Oh, yeah. Good God. Yes.
And the way that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So those.
I mean, well, there's actually like we still have places of connection, mm-hmm. even like down to representation. You know, so like there's definitely in terms of like in terms like representation in terms of images, what's exploitive and what is not. Mm-hmm. Definitely with equal pay, definitely with reproductive health, mm-hmm. and definitely with violence. Mm-hmm. So there are in terms of there are definitely still points of connection. The challenge I feel between black and white women mm-hmm. is like really in terms of trying to like keep bridging and like advocate for those struggles is like our communication. Like that's what it is. Like, you know, what do you mean by communication? I mean, in terms of what I've observed over the years, because like I'm a writer and observer, and less so an activist. But what I've observed over the years, online and even offline, like the online battles that I've seen are very much reflective of how I've understood it for like 20 years ago when it was offline and we were in college, and part of the reason why I had kind of had the conflict in the first place with the movement and even labeling myself as a feminist. Like, you know, it's been re-represented in the online space.
But what is that? You've said it's the same as communication, but what is that misunderstood, the core of that, what's the clash?
I think it's around being able to be to be thoughtful listeners about the like I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Yeah. But like I think it's around being thoughtful listeners around just the complexity of identities that women in the movement have, and being responsive to women who are like to transgender women, to women of color. But like, I feel like there's women within. I think the leadership of like the feminist movement, or what's been represented as leadership and thought leaders around the feminist movement, have often had a very privileged face, of like privileged white women face, and I think in terms of like trying to like unpack all of these messy little messy identities of women who you want part of the movement. I feel that the insistence, like the good thing has been the insistence by women who appear to have been on the fringes of the movement, insisting that their narratives be included in trying to like conceptualize what feminism means and how it operates in the world. And I also believe that it's been effective to kind of watch some white women start to understand the kind of double, triple consciousness that women within the movement have had. Women of color, transgender women, queer women. And the double consciousness you have to balance being a woman and then operating that within a race or within a gender identity or within a sexuality. So you have to balance all these. Balance all those things. And I think we've been really kind in years past of letting white women off the hook. Of having to like engage with the kind of fluidity of like engaging in double, triple consciousness in a whole host of spaces and like in power dynamics. We would like not like, and I don't mean to say that the like previous thinkers, writers, poets who basically are the ones who have taught me very much about understanding and like that my womanist foundation. Like, I don't mean to push back against that they didn't do that. Like Audre Lorde most assuredly did that work. And you can read Audre Lorde for days. And like, yeah, she most assuredly did that work. And that's who I get to look back towards as a, you know, as a talisman to like kind of help me navigate where we are now. Like, thank God. But I think more generally, you know, in years past, when I say like, and I mean, I'm thinking like 20 years past, let me be qualified, like not necessarily in the last 3 to 4, but definitely in years past, I think maybe we had been, we let folks off the hook a little bit. And I do enjoy witnessing the kind of pushback, patience and impatience that we've seen in recent times of folks trying to like force or compel white women of a certain class to like really try and engage and understand the levels of narrative and identity that are important to include in the total story and in a total effort in terms of feminism.
Okay, that then takes us to a really good turning point, which is to talk about the way in which all these issues that you just laid out play out in society. Like, what do they mean for the real world, right? And some sort of white hot examples to talk about. And one of the ways in which the class that you spoke about are standards of beauty, right? We're in award season, lots of black women on the carpet who have both been acknowledged and not necessarily acknowledged for the work that they've done. But the way in which some of them, like Viola Davis, where there has been a big talk about standards of beauty or her standard of beauty because of this clash in communication that you're talking about. That is to say, what she then thinks and what she presents and what the New York Times wrote about her. Now, in all fairness, now what the New York Times did was that they said that she didn't meet traditional standards of beauty. And that was the line that has gotten taken and run with, and that has set people on fire about. And so let's talk about that. But in all fairness to the New York Times, in that exact same sentence, they said, but those standards of beauty shouldn't have been there in the first place. So in this same sentence, they knocked down the setup, but the fact that people then only ran with the first part actually says and points to the larger issue, right? That there is this clash that is like that's a tripwire, right? So talk about that.
Why even have the sentence in the article in the first place? Tripwire or not, like why it was a tripwire is because it's a backhanded slap. Like the sentence construction of it in and of itself is a backhanded slap. Like, while maybe the writer had the the writer and the editorial team that accepted it, maybe.
I think it was the editor who did it, but that's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole nother conversation. Oh, guys.
Because the writer, when it came out, she was basically like crickets. Like, she didn't say anything, and she was like, talk to the editor. You know? She really was. She was like, I'm Alexander Stanley, and I write for the New York Times, but talk to my editor. And the editor was the one that the paper shoved out there to defend the article. Yeah,
I saw that. And it was like a sentence. It's also still an editorial choice, and like again, like in the profile about Michael Brown Jr. Why say he's no angel? You didn't need the sentence there in the first place. What is it like? You're by like it's almost like you're arguing with yourself about how you it's much more revealing a sentence about how you perceive brown skin than it is about how we are reacting to than our reaction. It says something about you, and part of our reaction in recognizing a tripwire is that you mean to still you're slow, like you're like getting like you're warming up to the idea that black people are beautiful. Is what the sentence tells me, and that is what we're offended by. Like, why even say that? Oh, you're trying to there's been a certain kind of normative rule about things that you've accepted too, and we've sort of helped you open your eyes, and as progressive as you think you are, you still are holding back you are still holding on to some retrograde beliefs. So
do you think that that points to a possibility or an idea that do you think that that white women are threatened by black standards, by black women as figures of beauty? Like, where do you think that this clash is coming from?
I see it on the, like, the harshest truth I can say. And then, like, you know, like the harshest truth I can say is that this is really where it comes back to white supremacy. If you, like, I don't know, like, I don't want to say that all white women feel threatened by Black beauty. I don't want to say that. But I do recognize that they've been complicit in a system of white supremacy. So you've never had to think about it before. And now that it's brought up to you, there's something, if there is a discomfort with it, then there's a profound interrogation internally that white women have to, like, deal with, in terms of why why they feel threatened by that. If you've always been lauded and treated as a god or a goddess, then to have some other, how the whole rule of order of things, the order of things kind of like flips on you, that is discomforting, that is terrifying. Why, and the question that you ultimately have to ask yourself is, why do you fear that? I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily believe that all white women feel that way, and I know white women, like, you know, some of my best friends are white women, but I also, and I know that they recognize, you know, beauty in all shades, but when the culture is suffused, like, is infused with just images and re-representations of you all over the place, to the, like, you know. And now, and if the market was saturated with just us, I'd, like, you know, this is actually the thought game that, you know, you'd ask if you're uncomfortable with that as a standard. That's the thought game you would ask. Well, imagine if the world was flipped over, like it was only images of us for 2 centuries. You're only looking at images of us for 2 centuries. And you barely saw any representations of you for 2 centuries. And the representations of you that you saw for 2 centuries represented you, like, your face is obscured, your body is distorted and contorted. You look like you are represented in the most debased ways. You know, for you to, like, you know, to affirm your... For Black women to affirm themselves because they were represented this way. Well, no, I'm flipping it, though. Oh, that if, like, white women were. Okay, if white women were to see, were able to, like, you know, like, see it in the kind of cultural, like, construct that we've lived in, then I could, like, you know, you'd celebrate this moment. And, you know, but but then you can, but also, like, kind of check yourself to see, like, all right, well, then why am I fearing it? If I really do believe like, you know, like, I love and believe in the beauty and wisdom and strength of all of my sisters, regardless of, like, you know, their skin color. And, but one of the things that's interesting to me as well, I mean, this is just an observation, but to think about, people don't realize the unconscious privilege that comes from always being able to see yourself, represented, and so in so many ways, just how can you not on some level gain a perspective or idea of superiority, because everywhere you turn, your image is the one that's being put forth and celebrated. And that gives an unconscious boost of self-confidence and entitlement that people don't realize. No, they don't. And it translates itself behaviorally when you expect that, like, folks are going to defer to your ideas. That's right. Which is, like, what's playing out, which is what you were talking about is playing out in feminism, right? Like, if you've only seen your, like, you know, images of yourself reflected everywhere to the point that, like, as the standard, as the standard, and then question, and then have questions about how like, you know, I'm a foreign object. You're, like, questioning, like, how I'm represented. Like, you know, somehow, and only because you've not been introduced, you've not seen enough representations of me. So therefore, I somehow, because of that, I'm excluded from the conversation. I'm like, you have to seek other places to validate and co-sign my ideas and my thoughts. Strange. Just continuing this idea of beauty. So what's interesting to me, though, is, so, you know, Viola Davis, when she got up, clapped back
at the Golden Globes about this slight at her, right, about not being a standard of beauty that was put in the New York Times. But what's interesting is that just last year, we had the quite opposite, where Lupita Nyong'o was the standard, right? She became a standard of beauty and class and grace on the red carpet. She was heralded in all of the beauty magazines. Everyone wanted to have her on. She's now a cosmetic spokesmodel.
Yeah,
So what do you think that's about in this? Because someone could look at this and be like, you two, you're missing the point. Like, what about Lupita Nyong'o?
What about Lupita Nyong'o versus what about, can we give them, isn't there a list? What about Jennifer Aniston? What about Gwyneth Paltrow? What about Kate Blanchett? What about, like...
All right, so you're saying that the fact that there's only one, or that there has been one...
Right, only one doesn't necessarily, like, mean anything. I'm like, you know, like, if it, like, we get one every few years.
Right.
Like, oh, like... Alec Weck.
Halle
Berry. Kerry Washington.
Right.
You know, in the 90s, Naomi Campbell, Tyra Banks.
Right.
If I can count on one hand.
Robin Givens.
Oh, in the 80s.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I forgot about her.
Yeah.
But like, I can count on one hand.
Yeah. Okay.
And in the millions of images that we generate and create now.
Right.
And it like that's a drop in a bucket in comparison to like the millions of images that we generate and create now, who we're looking to. Like I'm like, well, you got Lupita and Beyonce.
Right.
Like, y'all. Oh.
Well, so then. What's interesting in all of this is that now the debate also about black women and black images and the way that they're being portrayed in Hollywood and the way that gets recognized or upheld, tying into Ava DuVernay, right, and Selma, and the clash around the recognition of that film or not being recognized. And what do you think that her womanhood in any way plays into the lack of recognition by the Academy in terms of their nominations, or do you think it is maybe perhaps more about her youth and about her race? In what way does
it's all three, and also like the fourth element, she is an outsider. Like she's the embodiment of the fringe pushing inward, pushing towards the center. I mean, she like which is still like, you know, where I think a white male of this, like, you know, would not necessarily face the kind of scrutiny that she is, like she is, a cisgender white male, cis straight white male. Probably let me be even more specific in terms of category and of identity. But I think with Ava DuVernay,
and she's this white man who identifies strongly as
I mean,
men.
what we know about what we know about the Academy and the voters is that they're less diverse than the 114th Congress.
90% are white.
Yeah.
94%.
Right. They're less diverse than the 114th Congress.
The average age is 62.
It's like
all of the statistics are crazy.
It's amazing.
It's like 94% are male. The average age is 62, and 7 out of 10 are men.
Right, and you actually don't even, like, that's not even America. I'm like,
it's like Sweden.
It's like Sweden. Y'all, like, the Academy is its own white nation. I was like, oh my God. I'm like, this is hilarious. I'm like, do y'all know? Oh, y'all know? Like, of course we're going to push back. But with the...
and they would say, but we nominated 12 years since we gave 12 years.
I'm like, well, this is what I mean. It's like, it's the drop in the bucket. It's the, like, after, like, I don't know how many movies came out last year. Maybe, like, you know, a couple hundred, maybe more than that. I don't know. And then in the hundreds, like, and even in the preceding film year, in 2013, of all the movies that came out last year.
Fruitvale Station.
Fruitvale State, like, you know, like, we wanted to call 2013, like, you know, the black director's back. Right. And they're like, okay. We'll see how we do in the following film year. Academy does this thing where they want to self-congratulate themselves for, like, look, we acknowledge you black people in the last, like you know, award cycle. Like, you know, it's too much black stuff. So we got, like, we're just going to take a break. Like, this year we'll take a break. Like, you know, but we see you, but not really. Let's give somebody else a chance. But I think with Ava DuVernay's case, and we also know that the Academy has a piss poor record of acknowledging the accomplishments of women directors.
That's right.
I think Catherine Bigelow was
for Hurt Locker, yeah.
Well, no, like, was it Hurt Locker or or Zero Dark?
Oh.
No, Hurt Locker, she won the award.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think Zero Dark 30, she was like pushed aside. And it's only when, like, there's, I forget the story headline now. I'm thinking it's like 9 women directors. And the 9 films that have been directed by women that have made Best Picture nomination, only 1 has been nominated for Best Director, and that was Catherine Bigelow. The directors pool of the Academy is even less diverse than the actual Academy itself, which is saying everything. I think they're almost 99% white male of a certain age. So I think...
well beyond Social Security.
Right, well beyond Social Security. And I think she was already, like, the probability of her getting the Best Director nod was already stacked against her when you know those metrics. She's also, like, this is an independently financed film.
That's right.
And she did, like, and she is very outspoken and very, like, real about just kind of, like, the imbalances and what happens in the industry.
Right.
So and then, there may be, like, and I don't know if those guys actually even bothered seeing the movie or if they even got screeners in time to see the movie. That was
one of the issues I heard, yeah.
Right, and that's fair-ish, but I don't believe that wholly. I mean, and there's been small pictures that that were able to eke through and, like, garner all kinds of, like, awards, accolades from like Best Picture and director nods and so forth. So I feel like that's kind of like, I kind of feel like that's BS. I mean, like Slumdog Millionaire, I don't know who, like, was Miramax the distributor of that? And Miramax even still being considered, like, the independent small filmmaker
is the problem.
Is actually, like, that's a false narrative to buy into too. They're like a lot larger and, like, a much more influential entity than that.
Right.
So, and that's, like, I don't necessarily buy into that. I think their name recognition, and if the Academy is, like, the kind of lazy voters that I imagine them to be, I really do feel like it's name recognition and word of mouth and whoever's kissed the ring.
Right. So one of the things that's interesting, though, is the movie Selma itself, which raises the question, and I mean, Ava explores this in the movie, is the role of Black women in the civil rights movement and in the fight for rights and justice in the social justice movement. And what do you think about, what struck you about some of those portrayals, and what strikes you if they have any resonancy to the way that Black women and the role that Black women are now playing in current social justice movements like Million Hoodies and all of the rest of it in the wake of Eric Garner and Michael? Do you think there's any connection between what that portrayal was of women in Selma, and what do you think that is, and how it resonates at all to the modern social justice movement?
Yes, as a short answer. As a more involved answer, Selma is a great film to try and attempt to tell the story of the social justice movement, and the power and potency of how the social justice movement, and where folks have, like, where some folks have been looping on a representation of Lyndon Baines Johnson. And I'm like, you guys are not seeing the same movie I saw, because it was clear to me that it was a tension, like the relationship was, like, in partnership. One is optics, make the country believe that I have the urgency to get the votes, is what really was the relationship with King and Johnson. duh.
One of the problems I think is actually that Tom Wilkinson just wasn't that great of a Johnson, and so I think that that's actually is a big part of a problem.
All right, that's actually fair. It wouldn't who knew that Breaking Bad dude was going to be the most amazing LBJ ever.
Right. I mean, the accent wasn't even right.
No, the accent wasn't even right. I mean, I appreciated him, but that was the accurate.
Because he didn't bring any. One of the issues is that he didn't bring any notes to the role.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he didn't give the role a lot more dimensionality.
You know what? That's actually fair.
That's what I think.
That's actually a really fair read. No one, not a lot of people have said that, and that's actually a fair read because I think, how I know what I remember of studying Johnson, I'm like, that was kind.
Kind of. Oh, kind? I don't know. I mean, I think that scene. I mean, I don't want to get all attention in the movie, but I think that part of the problem and the backlash is that he didn't give her enough depth to portray a lot of his nuance.
Right. And he had nuances for days.
For days. And none of that came across in the movie.
Yeah, and I think if the fear is that you don't know that Johnson was a complex human being.
That's right.
Then that might actually be the critique
by
but they're doing a piss poor job of that.
Right.
His defenders, because I'm like he's complicated. Right. I know that. I'm very familiar.
So,
but to come back to how the women were represented.
Yeah.
I would have, the women were, the fact that we even got inklings of women representation in the film was already a feat in of itself, because I think some people had not often continually perpetuate and discount the role of women leadership from Diane Nash and Amelia Boynton.
Right.
So I was glad to see them there, and I was glad to have those moments of stuff with the women in the movement, but I think then it's more or less a cultural idea. Let me say this, in a sense of I think the cultural idea is that we buy into the notion of male leadership in social movements, and so you've been introduced to this idea and this standard for so many years that's what your eye goes to almost immediately, which. Not to say that they're not to say that's right. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's almost a conditioned behavior that we will sooner embrace the idea of male leadership in terms of channeling something very serious in a social justice movement than accept that it's that.
So you think the movie reinforced the idea of male leadership in social justice over the women?
Yes and no. I'm going to say yes-ish, which is a wishy-washy yes-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Because I feel like Diane Nash could have had a much more amplified role in the film.
And she did in real life.
I mean, she did in real life, but I feel like the discount, the thing that bothered me is that I wanted more from Diane Nash.
I agree with that.
I was grateful for the moments we had with Syretta Scott King. And I was grateful to see the women represented. I was grateful to see them because I was worried that they wouldn't be.
Right.
But I would have particularly with the conflict with SNCC, with the internal conflict with SNCC with the Selma voter registration bits before King got there, and
right.
certainly with John, the conflict with do we how we do this march in Selma, and that moment, I would have liked Diane Nash's representation much more amplified there, just because that was much more reflective of the history. But at this point, I'm grateful for the larger narrative of the film and the movement of the movement. But what makes it interesting to me to tie it to today. Is that I still think it's this cultural, behavior of looking toward the male representation of the social justice movement. And part of the reason why we still are kind of dealing with that clash is in a sense that part of the momentum we've garnered in this incarnation of a social justice movement stems from the kind of disproportionate violence and targeting of innocent black males. It's the black male body that has been the catalyst for really advancing forward this social justice movement. And that's not to say that that's that's absolutely important and critical and necessary and like very much my struggle too. It hurts me on some level that in a sense that we've not I'm kind of getting to it, but in a sense that it took when the same type of violence happens to black women, would I be able to see a social justice movement galvanize the communities across age, gender, class, race at the level that I'm seeing it right now? For where were we at this level when Renisha McBride was shot and killed? I mean, we were granted a social justice movement happened that actually compelled an arrest and eventually led to a conviction. And then partly to the work of the activists in the Detroit area, and certainly and also compounded with the work of the film that Dream Hampton created to get the word out to the larger, to the nation about this particular set of injustices. But would it get national media coverage at the level of this? Would we be marching in the street? Just in terms of black women are just as much a victim of police brutality and violence, and where black women are definitely out in the front lines and standing right beside black men when these things happen, and are organizers, or Million Hoodies, or the national moment, and the national moment of silence that Feminista Jones had organized, right? This is creating a hashtag Black Lives Matter. That's black women. That's right. Just queer women. Black queer women, exactly. But just that, we're out there on the front lines, and I can't get you to acknowledge, my personhood, my just my personhood in the same spaces. I can't get you out in the streets marching for me when an injustice is done to me. And you certainly want to and then you want to check me when I tell you that you know what, I don't owe you a smile. I don't owe you my time, and you want to check me and say walking down the street, walking down the street, and then you want to check me and tell me I'm too sensitive about that? Are you for real? Is that what we're doing? Because that's hilarious. Please don't. So the tension between you recognize that this moment is really key for everybody. It's so key. But at the same time, there's a tension because you feel as if there's not the same sort of attention given to black women's issues. And what's interesting, it's not to say that I know some black men have my back, but I feel like all black women got black men's back in this situation. Wow. And it's not the flip. It's not the flip. Wow. And that's way harsh. Wow. And how do you live with that reality? I'm sad to say that. How do you live with the reality? How do you live with that? We shall overcome. Real talk. I live with that reality, knowing that it's going to take generations of bad behaviors or certain things to be undone. I know it's going to take an evolution of my average bros being down with standing with me on stuff. I know that. So I'm past the point of being angry about it. I'm it hurts and I'm disappointed, but I'm past the point of being angry because we got to keep it moving. But one of the things that this relates to that you were talking about earlier is the fact that this tension is one of the ones that white women don't acknowledge, in the feminist argument and feminist talk, and that's a part of, the tension. Yeah, right? All the men are black. All the women are white, and so, all the men are black and all the women are white, but some of us are brave. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm quoting something. Well, in this paradigm of the way in which black women support black men in a way that you've just laid out that
perhaps is disproportionate or is disproportionate, and are essential to that, but at the same time don't have the same reciprocated to them. I'm wondering in this, in any way, how you think it might relate to the first family, like the relationship between Mrs. Obama and President Obama, where for most of their lives, up until the time that he ran for president, or probably the Senate, but for most of their lives, from the time that they were, in their 20s to, just a few years ago, she was in the driver's seat, right? She made the most money. She made the decisions. Like, there was a definite difference in their relationship, and then suddenly that person had to then become subordinated to this other thing.
We think that person has become subordinated to this other thing.
I mean, perhaps. Who knows?
I'm like, I don't know if that's actually true at all. I think the perception is like the perception of it, because there's these metrics that say that she's an independent and equal partner that we accept. But we don't necessarily understand it in this construct that is the executive office and the office of the president.
That's right.
And how that works. We don't have an understanding of what that is.
Right.
I am of the belief that our understanding about how marriage and partnership works, and particularly this high-profile, very political marriage and partnership works, I think our understanding of that is really, it might be retrograde, it might be limited. I mean, I don't think that that's their relationship at all. I think, he has his job, and she, there's a job that she has as First Lady, and because in some of the initiatives and the work that she does as First Lady of the United States, some people would like to discount and make it sound like it's to try and minimize it. And I think that's actually an unfair read too.
For me, though, one of the things that I see in her, the way that I read her behavior, is I think that she has a lot of tension in that job. I think that there are times when she embraces it, and there are times when she recoils from it. There are times when she is the First Lady, and times that she is Mrs. Obama, in a way that I don't remember seeing in First Ladies. That's that stark difference. And one of the ways that one of the reasons why I've said that is because of the very idea of the First Lady, that is to say that the First Lady is modeled on the plantation mistress. That is that role. And the very First Lady of the United States was a plantation mistress. It was Martha Washington. And that in so many ways, the idea of what that's supposed to be, and I think that there's a tension that she has in that job, because
a lot of women, women have been pushing, I think First Ladies have been pushing against what that role has been, but we can go back as far as
Eleanor
Roosevelt, maybe further, I don't know.
Yeah, Mary Lincoln. That's one of the reasons why people reviled her.
Right, and I think women, I think the previous First Ladies have been pushing against that particular box, that paradigm, for a minute.
Right.
Hillary Clinton, most assuredly
That's
pushed
right.
against that.
That's right.
I think Barbara Bush, more or less, probably embraced that very retrograde definition of what a First Lady. And Nancy Reagan, I don't know anymore. I'm really conflicted. I want to know the tea. I feel like there's some tea there. There's but she, the public perception probably. Definitely, if we're gonna go with that definition, that construct, sure. But I appreciate Mrs. Obama being very present in her conflict.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a modern mother and woman struggle, is to be to have all of these identities.
That's right.
And it's very human. It humanizes her for me.
That's right. I agree with that.
And I think that's. We really do, after a while, need to recognize that these folks in these titles, in these spaces, are human beings. And, I appreciate her being honest and visible about her struggles. She wants to raise her daughters. She cares about military women. Yeah, she's a complete human being. She's a complete person.
Well,
and I think that's important. I think that's actually the most visually powerful thing for all of us to see is a complete person occupying that space.
Right, which is about transforming women from, where we started it before, transforming women from objects into human beings, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think that, that really defines the frame that we're talking about, which is that she's a modern woman operating within these sort of ancient paradigms of women, and what that tension is about and what that is playing out is what we're seeing in so many areas.
Yeah.
Which is so. On that point, where do you see personally as a Black feminist? Where do you think what is the future of Black feminism?
Ugh. That's a huge question.
Of course.
It's an enormous question.
Right. But you give big answers, so.
I don't know if I give big answers because I'm feeling my way through the dark, and I think that's kind of how I feel about the future. Is I'm going to continue to feel my way through the dark. There's like the more quantifiable policy, like quality of life, pursuit of happiness kind of stuff, which is, I would like. We get equal pay. Maybe I can stop all 50 states from trying to set me to tell me that I don't have dominion over my own body. Ensure those protections. That we can get men and women to recognize violence. To believe, violence against women, to believe victims, to believe women when they tell you that they've been harmed, they've been wronged, they've been hurt, they've been brutalized. To
a la Mr. Cosby, right? It took 27 women, 30 women for some people to believe.
I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also to hear women, it's not to say that it's to categorize it in these boxes, but I'm just thinking about what do I want for myself. I can only think about this in terms of what I want it for myself, and it really brings to mind a Lucille Clifton poem. Won't you celebrate with me? Won't you celebrate with me what I've shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I seek to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me so that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Well, that's a brilliant place and way to end, with you reciting that poem about what all of this means to you. And so we celebrate you and celebrate your ideas, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you next time for another conversation about feminism.